Millionaire Cowboy heard them laugh at widow's daughter's old dress, his next move. Silenced everyone. The dress was blue once. Now it was the color of dust and old rain, faded so many times that the little girl wearing it looked like she had stepped out of a photograph nobody wanted anymore. Her name was Daisy. She was 7 years old, and she stood at the edge of the schoolyard in Cedar Hollow, Texas, holding her mama's hand a little too tight, because she already knew what was coming. The other children noticed first, then they whispered, then they laughed. "Look at her dress," one boy said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "Did she find that in the trash?" Daisy's cheeks turned red. She looked down at her shoes, worn thin at the toes, and she didn't say a word. She just squeezed her mother's hand tighter, the way children do when the world feels too big and too cruel and they don't know where else to hold on. Her mother, Eliza Grant, knelt down right there in front of everyone. She didn't yell. She didn't cry, not yet. She just looked her daughter in the eyes and said, soft and steady, "That dress was your grandmother's. It's got more love sewn into it than anything new could ever have." But children don't understand love sewn into old cotton. They only understand what they see. And what they saw was a poor widow and her poor daughter, standing alone while everyone else walked past in their pretty new clothes. If this story is touching something in your heart already, that's good, because it's about to get even more tender. Take a moment, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from tonight, because stories like this one are meant to be shared with someone who needs a little hope. Now let's keep going. Eliza had buried her husband 2 winters ago. Tom Grant had been a good man, gentle with his hands and gentler with his words, and when the fever took him, it took the color right out of Eliza's world too. She was left with a small house at the edge of town, a garden that barely fed them, and a daughter who still asked sometimes in the quiet hours before sleep when Daddy was coming home. Eliza worked wherever she could. She mended clothes for the wealthier families in town. She took in washing. She sold eggs from the 3 hens she still had left after selling the rest to pay for medicine that hadn't saved Tom anyway. Pride was the only thing she had left that nobody could take from her, and she held onto it the way a drowning woman holds onto driftwood. That was the day everything changed. Because standing near the schoolyard fence, close enough to hear every cruel word those children said, was a man named Nathaniel Cole. Folks in Cedar Hollow knew the name. Cole Ranch stretched out over more land than most men could ride across in a full day, and Nathaniel had built it up himself after inheriting nothing but debt and a broken-down homestead from his father. He was rich now, richer than anyone in 3 counties, but he didn't dress like it. He wore plain work shirts, his boots were scuffed from actual labor, and his hands were calloused like any rancher's. He had come to town that morning only to pick up supplies. He hadn't meant to see anything at all, but he saw Daisy's face when the laughter hit her. He saw the way her small shoulders curled inward like she was trying to disappear, and something in his chest, something that had been quiet and closed off for a long time, cracked open just a little. Nathaniel had lost his own wife 3 years before in childbirth, along with the son who never got to open his eyes. Since then, he had built fences and broken horses and worked himself into exhaustion every single day, because grief was easier to carry when your body was too tired to feel it. He didn't talk about it. He didn't cry about it, not where anyone could see. But watching that little girl standing there in her grandmother's old dress, ashamed of something she never should have been ashamed of, he felt that old wound open right back up. He walked over, slow, unhurried, the way he did everything. The children scattered a little when they saw him coming, because even kids knew who Nathaniel Cole was. He knelt down in front of Daisy, the same way her mother had, and he said, "You know, I think that's about the prettiest blue I ever seen. Matches your eyes real nice." Daisy blinked up at him, unsure if he was teasing her too, but there was nothing but gentleness in his face. "It was my grandma's," she said quietly. "Well then," Nathaniel said, "that makes it about the most valuable dress in this whole town. Store-bought dresses don't carry stories in them. Yours does." Eliza stood there watching, her heart caught somewhere between gratitude and suspicion. She didn't know this man beyond his name and his reputation, and she had learned the hard way that kindness from strangers often came with strings attached. But there was nothing performative in the way he spoke to her daughter. He wasn't doing it to be seen. He was doing it because he meant it. "Thank you," Eliza said softly. "But you don't need to trouble yourself." Nathaniel stood back up, tipped his hat toward her. "No trouble at all, ma'am. Just couldn't stand by and watch." He paused, studying her for a moment. "You're Tom Grant's widow, aren't you? He fixed my wagon wheel once, refused to take a penny for it. Good man." Eliza's eyes stung at the mention of her husband's name from a stranger's mouth, spoken with respect instead of pity. "He was," she whispered. "That should have been the end of it. A kind word, a moment, and then 2 strangers going their separate ways back into their separate lives. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, a storm rolled through Cedar Hollow, the likes of which the town hadn't seen in years. Rain came down in sheets, wind tore branches from trees, and somewhere in the middle of that chaos, the roof of Eliza's small house gave way. Water poured into Daisy's room. The wind ripped a section of shingles clean off, and Eliza spent the night with her daughter, huddled in the driest corner of the kitchen, praying the whole structure wouldn't come down around them. By morning, half the roof was gone, and rain had ruined what little furniture they had. Eliza sat on the porch steps, soaked through, staring at the wreckage of the only home she had left. And for the first time since Tom died, she let herself cry where someone might see. That someone was Nathaniel Cole, riding past on his way to check his own fences after the storm, when he spotted the damage. He didn't ask permission. He simply turned his horse and rode straight up to the house. "You can't stay here," he said, taking in the collapsed roofline, the standing water in the yard, the exhaustion carved into Eliza's face. "Not with the girl, not until this gets fixed proper." "We'll manage," Eliza said, the old pride rising up, automatic as breathing. "I know you will," Nathaniel said. "You've managed plenty already from what I can see, but managing and suffering aren't the same thing, and there's no shame in accepting help when a storm did this, not you." He offered her the old foreman's cabin on his property, sitting empty since the last hand had moved on. Small, simple, but dry and warm, with a good stove and a solid roof. Eliza refused twice. The third time, Daisy tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, I'm cold," and something in Eliza broke and mended at the same time. She said yes. The days that followed were quiet ones. Nathaniel gave them space, didn't hover, didn't make Eliza feel like a charity case. He simply made sure firewood appeared at their door each evening, that a crate of vegetables sat on the step some mornings, that Daisy had a small wooden horse carved by his own hands waiting for her on the porch rail one afternoon. No note, no explanation, just kindness left quiet as falling snow. Trust doesn't come from grand speeches. It comes from small moments repeated, until a person starts to believe them. Eliza noticed the way Nathaniel spoke gently to his ranch hands, never raising his voice even when mistakes were made. She noticed how he crouched down to Daisy's height every time he spoke to her, how he never made promises he didn't keep, how he showed up with actions instead of empty words. Daisy noticed something too. She started waiting by the window in the evenings, watching for his horse coming up the path. She started calling him Mr. Nathaniel instead of just the rancher man, and one evening, while he was teaching her how to properly hold the reins on his gentlest mare, she asked him plainly, "Do you have a little girl of your own?" Nathaniel's hand stilled on the leather. "I did," he said quietly. "She never got the chance to be born. Her mama went to heaven the same night." Daisy considered this with the seriousness only children have. "That's why you're sad sometimes," she said, "even when you're smiling." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, surprised at how easily a 7-year-old could see straight through to the truth grown men spent years hiding. "I suppose it is," he admitted. "You can borrow me sometimes," Daisy said simply. "If you want. I don't mind sharing." Something in Nathaniel's chest, closed tight for 3 long years, opened wider than it had in all the time. But peace rarely comes without a test to prove it's real. Word had spread through Cedar Hollow about the widow living on Cole land, and not everyone approved. Nathaniel's own aunt, Margaret Cole, a sharp-tongued woman who had long hoped Nathaniel would remarry into wealth and status befitting the family name, arrived at the ranch one afternoon with fire in her eyes. "People are talking," Margaret said, standing in the parlor with her arms crossed tight. "A grown man, unmarried, keeping a widow and her child on his land. It isn't proper, Nathaniel. It isn't proper at all." "Let them talk," Nathaniel said evenly. "I answer to God and to my own conscience, not to gossip in a general store." "And what happens when she starts expecting more than charity? What happens when that little girl starts calling you something you're not?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe I want her to." Margaret left in a huff, but her words did what cruel words always do. They found their way back to Eliza through the mouths of townsfolk who couldn't mind their own business. Eliza heard whispers at the market, felt eyes on her at church, and the old fear crept back in, the fear that she was nothing but a burden, a scandal, a woman not good enough to be near a man like Nathaniel Cole. She decided to leave. Quietly, before dawn, she packed what little they owned and prepared to take Daisy back to her sister's crowded house 2 towns over, rather than bring shame onto the man who had shown them nothing but kindness. But Nathaniel found her loading the wagon in the gray morning light, and something in him refused to let her go without saying what he'd been carrying silent for weeks. "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "Please, don't go." "Nathaniel, the talk in town, it isn't right. What people are saying about us, about you being tied to a poor widow with nothing to offer. You think I care 2 cents what this town says?" His voice cracked with an emotion he rarely let show. "Eliza, I built this ranch up from nothing because I thought hard work could fill the whole grief left in me. It never did. Not until you and that little girl showed up in my life and made this place feel like a home again instead of just land I own." Eliza's hands trembled on the wagon rail. "I have nothing to give you, Nathaniel. No money, no name that matters. Nothing but debts and an old dress and a broken heart." "You have everything that matters," he said, stepping closer. You have a heart big enough to still love after losing everything. You raised a daughter who sees the good in people even when the world's been cruel to her. That's not nothing, Eliza. That's everything a man could ever want in this life. The tears came then, finally, the ones she'd been holding back through months of struggle. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared of losing again. So am I, Nathaniel admitted. Every single day. But I'd rather be scared standing next to you than safe and alone the way I've been these past 3 years. He reached out, gentle as always, and took her hand. Marry me, Eliza. Not because you need saving. You've saved yourself plenty already. Marry me because this ranch, this life, none of it means anything without you and Daisy in it. Daisy, who had woken and slipped out onto the porch unnoticed, came running down the steps in her nightgown, eyes wide. Are you going to be my papa now? She asked, breathless with hope. Nathaniel knelt down, the way he always did, right to her level. If your mama says yes, and if you'll have me, I'd be the proudest man in Texas to be your papa. Daisy threw her arms around his neck and over her small shoulder. Nathaniel looked at Eliza with a question in his eyes that needed no more words. Yes, Eliza whispered, laughing through her tears. Yes, to all of it. They married that spring, in a small ceremony under the old oak tree behind the ranch house, with wildflowers instead of roses in the whole town, even Margaret, softened by time and by watching real love unfold right in front of her, in attendance. Daisy wore a new dress that day, but she has to keep a small piece of the old blue fabric sewn secretly into the hem, so her grandmother could still be close to her heart. Years later, when people in Cedar Hollow told the story, they didn't talk about the millionaire and the widow. They talked about the day a little girl was laughed at for an old dress, and how that same dress led her to a father who loved her like his own, a mother who found her strength again, and a home built not on money, but on kindness that refused to look away. If this story warmed your heart tonight, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how it made you feel. Stories like Eliza and Nathaniel's remind us that real love isn't loud, it's patient. It shows up quietly and stays. If you believe in second chances and homes built on love instead of money, subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next story.